Okay, you're going to take a look at a game that I played on chess.com with a friend from another website, forum called FOFC. And we played this game just kind of, I mean, it didn't mean anything, just kind of a friendly game. So I'm going to go through it. I played okay. He played pretty well, I thought, and it kind of fell apart for him at the end. So we're going to look through this. I had just posted a video about the Philidor defense, which I think this is. My screen here is now saying this is the Scotch. Ooh, okay, I can't really do it. So I really thought that playing d6 here was the Philidor defense, so I'll look it up after the game. That's what I thought. So I know that just playing d4 here after, say, here, I'll back up. So say he plays knight c6 and then I play d4. That's what I thought the Scotch game was, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't really care too much about the terminology, but would be nice to get something right once in a while. So anyway, he plays this, and I just played d4 against almost any opening moves involving e4 and knight f3. That's just kind of my opening repertoire. I had considered, at one time I would have immediately played d5 here, but I'm looking to play a little bit something different. Maybe I can get a quick pin. Well, obviously I get the pin, but maybe I can attack the pin piece with d5 next move, so that's what I'm looking to do. And doesn't really work out when he attacks with a6. So back off, and now I've got my bishop on a pretty nice long diagonal here from a2 down to g8. So I'm pretty happy with that. He's stopping knight g5 there, or bishop g5, which is, you know, probably okay. There's probably f6 would have been fine also at some point. So I wanted to continue with a pin here. What I was thinking was pinning this knight. He's probably going to play bishop b7 or bishop d7, either one. And this is kind of the setup I was looking at, so that his bishop would be just kind of bumping up against this pawn chain here and not really doing much. Does have the problem of, if he decides to undermine my pawn chain with f5, then d5 can become sort of weak. So I would maybe have to prepare c4 in some way with maybe b3, something like that. So that's what I was looking at, and this is how it went, which is pretty similar to what I was talking about. And he does wind up with the bishop back on b7, and hopefully not doing very much. Was kind of what I was thinking. So castles, and now instead of playing f5, which I thought would have been pretty good for him, he went ahead and played knight f6, which attacks e4. And I'm going to need to defend that right away. I'd like to eventually be able to play c4, so I didn't play the more natural looking knight c3. I thought I would eventually at some point like to play b3 and c4 and support this pawn chain, so that my idea of keeping his light square bishop out of the game and then his dark square bishop is going to be a bad bishop. That was my idea, was kind of restrict his minor pieces. That was kind of the goal of my opening. So we'll see how it worked out. Here, you know, I guess I probably should have played b3 first. Let's see. Okay. So I remember thinking this was sort of it looks a little bit like a gambit, but say he plays b takes and then queen takes, and now he could do this or whatever. Say this, and here I'm on this weak pawn here, and he's got an isolated wing pawn. So I thought this was probably okay, and we just went ahead with that. It kind of detoured my opening plan a little bit. He didn't take, he went ahead and castled, so I reinforced with b3 so that I do have my original plan. So the move order was a little strange there, but I think it works out. So he goes ahead and brings the queen there anyway, and I'm going to develop. And I had a little debate about where to develop my my knight, my b1 knight, whether to develop it to c3 or d2. And you know, if I develop a d2 right away, it gets in the way of the dark square bishop getting out. I don't really want to bring my dark square bishop to b2 because it doesn't do much. So I wanted to keep it on this diagonal and be a little bit flexible, able to go to e3, things like that. So my goal then was, or what I decided on, was bishop d2 and knight c3 ultimately. And so here we go. I've got the pawn on b5 under attack. And he pushes it now. Here's a what I would think is a really pivotal moment in the match. I decided to go ahead and move to knight b5, which looks a little hairy once he's able to play c6. And c6 is protected twice by pieces. So my one time protecting it with d6 isn't going to be sufficient. So he's going to be able to get a little bit of pressure there. But what I decided was that I would ultimately have a4, which I'd worked out some variations, and I didn't think I was going to lose a pawn. Might even be able to get a passed pawn out of it, or at least somewhere that would restrict his backwards pawn even further, kind of put a little bind on him. So I went ahead and tried to play knight b5. It didn't work out the way I wanted because I forgot that it abandons e4 just a little bit more than I wanted to. So ultimately e4 is going to be hanging in the line that actually happens. But you know, my plan was probably good except for that, or at least it seems like it might be good to be something worth looking at in a little bit more detail. So as you can see, he goes ahead and plays c6, and I answer with a4, which suddenly, since the d5 pawn is hanging, we're being attacked twice. See, I didn't even think about the fact that since my d5 pawn went away, that e4 was going to be under attack twice and only defended once. So it hangs, and now I've got some real problems. His knight can come to c3. My bishop's under attack, which I'm going to want my dark square bishop. You know, ultimately, I'm going to really want that. He's all of a sudden got a couple of strong center pawns, even though the d6 pawn is a little bit weak. It's still connected. It's got a little pawn chain in the center going. My center is completely gone, devoid of pawns where it used to be strong. d5 fell, and then e4 fell. That's kind of the reverse order of the way it would normally go, but that's the way it went. So I was expecting to get a passed pawn on b5, and I didn't. In fact, I got kind of the worst of it here. So truthfully, I could have looked at it a little deeper than I did, but you know, it is what it is. My favorite phrase. So moving forward, he is going to, I assume, put the knight on c3 and just park it for a while. I didn't want to give up the knight right away. I probably should have. I probably just left it there, and he probably would have just snapped it off of there. I don't know. He might not have, but it would have been a trade I should have been willing to make, because the knight on c3 there would be pretty strong. So trading off my dark square bishop, which I like, but don't think it's going to be as valuable as his knight on c3. So ultimately, his goal, I think, he would have been better off right here playing knight c3 and just parking that thing there for a while. I probably would have had to waste 2 moves playing bishop d2 and then taking the knight. Of course, if he's not able to support it, he's probably going to lose the pawn that winds up on c3. So he does play knight c3. Oh yeah, I forgot that I'd actually wound up guarding that square with b5, and I forgot that's how it went. So it didn't ultimately work out for him, and then the c3 pawn is going to wind up being weak. So I sound kind of silly, just completely forgot that b5 was covering it, but there it is. The knight on b5 captures c3. So it was, you know, it would look really nice there having that knight on c3 if it wasn't so easy to snap off. So ultimately that plan isn't good. But that was just my initial impression there. Probably, once again, could have spent a little bit more time looking at it. So here we have a white pawn, or I'm sorry, a weak pawn on c3. That is going to be something I'm going to want to try to gobble up fairly quickly. He's looking for kingside attacks. Now he's got this sort of skewer on the knight and into the g2 square. So I'm going to have to be very careful about playing the knight. I do panic just a little bit here, more than I should. The pawn on e5, in my brain, I'm automatically thinking, okay, tactics, tactics. He can push the pawn and attack the knight with the pawn, so I'm going to have to move the knight or lose the knight, and if I move it, then he checkmates me on g2. So I panic just a little bit here, and I decide to get the queen sort of evicted, even though this was probably a good move. I'm pretty sure I was wrong in the reason I played it. I don't exactly remember if that's fully what I was thinking, but I'm pretty sure I panicked a little bit here and decided that e4 was going to be the threat, and then played h3 as a response. Sort of looks like this might be hanging the knight, but the g pawn is only pinned if the queen is there, so the queen can't capture here, and the knight, or the bishop, can't capture the knight, because then I take the queen for free. So there's no tactic here that works that I can find. So he retreats the queen. Might have been, well, there's no real safe places along the g file for him, so this is probably okay if he wants to keep it into the attack that he's got brewing here, which I don't think is, I think it's a little early for attack. He probably needs to get some rooks or pawns involved besides just the light squared bishop, which is kind of out of the battle by the knight there, and the dark squared bishop, which isn't really doing anything on e7 and is kind of hemmed in by the pawns. So I don't think the attack is quite ready to come about yet. I think he probably pushed ahead a little early here, but he decides to stick with the queen on h5 here, which is a little bit ready to jump in at any time. So I'm wanting to protect that diagonal. I'm sorry, that what do you call it? File? Yeah, the G file. So I'm going to try to get my knight to G4. And that's what I do. I was a little worried about, actually I was maybe not going to do that if the possibility of f5 came about, but I did want to get my knight sort of off of that diagonal where he can just take it with bishop takes f3, and then I'm going to have to play g takes f3 to keep the material, and then my g file is really going to be weak. So I wanted to at least move the knight. Then he blocked his f pawn with the bishop, so knight g4 came right about. So knight g4 was played, followed by queen g6 now, and he's offering a trade of queens. I remember playing this move and then suddenly panicking, thinking I'd lost on g2. But no, I had okayed the move in my head before I made it, and then I just had a momentary relapse into panicking. But then I remembered that knight takes f6 is check, so he can't checkmate me on g2. However, it does become a little bit of a problem to guard g2, and what I'm going to have to do is just throw a pawn away doing it. But the knight is going to be attacked by h5 next move if I don't get it out of the way. So I really kind of think this line is either forced or close to it. I didn't see a whole lot of choice. So went ahead and played knight takes f6, queen takes, and then I took the pawn. He comes right back in. And that's right, I forgot that he took with the queen there. So let's back up here and look just a second. Was there something better I could have done to prevent queen g6 other than not taking the pawn? That would have been okay, because I would have been covering g6 there. But maybe f3 here. So I play f3 and he plays queen g6, and now I just need to protect the pawn because the g2 pawn is pinned, so it's going to be taken by the bishop. So if I can just figure a way to take that pawn, or I'm sorry, to protect that pawn one more time, maybe rook to f1, queen to f2, something like that, then that might have been okay. So these are the things that are happening here. I take the pawn, he goes back to the g file, so now I do have to defend that. f3 just hangs the pawn, but it does allow me to protect along the second rank. I can protect g2. So he plays here, takes the pawn. I've got rook a2, so g2 is protected. He kind of digs himself a little bit of a hole here. And I am looking at ways to attack weak pawns while still maintaining my defense of g2 and maybe eventually evicting the bishop, which I'm not seeing a real obvious way. f5 is probably a pretty good move, keeping me from playing something like g4. So where are we at? Okay, we're going to attack the weak a5 pawn, which is isolated, no way to defend it other than the rooks. Something like, well, I guess that doesn't work. But I don't think there's much way he can defend a5. However, the problem being that if I take on a5 with the bishop, my queen is tied to the defense of a5. This also opens up a discovered attack on the bishop. So he defends that, and starting to get some pawns marching in. But now we're going to see that the movement of this bishop is a little bit restricted. It can't come to e2 or d1 anymore because they're protected by white pieces. g4 is obviously protected. It can go to h5, but it's going to be out of play a little bit there. So this becomes a good time to relieve the pin. And black could play bishop h5 here, I guess. I'm not really sure what would happen at that point. I didn't really look too much at it, but I thought getting the bishop out of the way was probably a good idea. He decides to go ahead and just move in here and throw away the bishop. However, I think he thought he had more here than he actually does. Was not able to find any mating lines here, so I went ahead and took, and now he's threatening to push this f-pawn and maybe get some sort of a mate on G2. G2 still protected. Maybe find some way to get a mate on G1. He's going to take on H3. There's all kinds of things that are, you know, sort of in the air here, but nothing really concrete is there. So coming in here, I calculated that this move was going to be fine. That A2 rook is still going to be really handy for defense. So he decides, for some reason, to go ahead and swap or offer a trade of queens, thinking maybe he can push the pawns and a castle. I'm not really sure. I don't know that this was the best thing to do, although I'm not sure what the options are. You know, rook G1 I think probably defends everything nicely. Oh, I see. He can't do much else because I'm attacking G7. So that's right. I'd forgotten that I was attacking G7. So this is probably the only move that saves the game for him at this point. You could go back and look at maybe rook takes queen takes H3. But is there anything left after this? You know, there aren't any pieces to join the attack. There's no checks left. F2 fails to queen takes, pawn takes, king takes, and now what are we? We're down, you know, almost a full queen here. We've got some pawns, but we're down a lot of materials. So this didn't work out for black. I don't think anything really works out there, and probably this is the best move. However, didn't settle for the queen exchange. This gets, I think this is probably just flat winning at this point. We've got sort of a little windmill set up here, and things have really turned south for black pretty quickly. So this is the way the rest of the game played out. I'll just step through it really quickly because there isn't anything really surprising. And checkmate is how it ended. So going back, sort of the key time here, the place where the game really kind of changed. I thought that black had a little edge until right in here. I'm not sure that E4 directly loses. Maybe bishop H5. I could look at a couple of queen lines. Let's back up. I could look at a couple of computer evaluations. In fact, let's throw Houdini on this real quick and see what happens. Houdini is saying pretty even here, and bishop takes H5 is going to even the material. I'm sorry, bishop takes A5 is going to even the material. C5 for white is recommended. So this is pretty even. So definitely not lost. So let's see what happens when. Okay, let's go back to the main line, please. Let's see what happens when black plays E4. Still fairly even here. And right now it's starting to give white the advantage and saying take the bishop. So this is where I think probably queen G3 might be the losing, ultimate losing move. And instead of queen G3 here, just bishop H5. Yeah, bishop H5. And now white plays something like bishop takes A5, so we're looking at that that pawn grab, or queen D2 now, and just adding to the defense of G2. So yeah, kind of a flexible move. Also looking at attacking maybe D6, and just getting the queen on a good square, frankly, off of the white squares, so the bishop can't attack. I think probably ultimately what we're going to see is that queen G3 was the losing move. So forward to the end, this is the final position, checkmate. So this is how the game ended. It was a pretty interesting game, and I enjoyed it a lot. And I hope to be able to play a rematch with him at some point in the near future. And hopefully I'd love to hear some of his thoughts on the game as well. All right, thanks for watching.